Good evening. Welcome to Laval Academy. Per New York State law, please be aware of the fire exits in the event of an evacuation. Should it be necessary to leave the auditorium during the presentation, please note the 2 back exits and the 2 stage exits at the back in front of the auditorium. We request that you choose the closest exit and move in a calm manner to the sidewalk areas outside the building. Tonight's presentation is a culmination of effort put forth by a variety of local organizations. I would like to thank the following people: Jake Styria, Jordan Seymour, and Superintendent Rebecca Dunkel-King of Laval Academy, Carla Fowler, Matt Trevini, Pete Walsman, Tim Woodrick, and Jesse Irwin of the Friends of the Black River, Jonathan Miller of the Lewis County Historical Society, Kristen Ochter of the Lewis County Chamber of Commerce, Michelle Swisher of the Lewis County Soil and Water Conservation, Katie Malinowski and Jennifer Harville of the Tug Hill Commission, and lastly, Nikki Dietrich of the River Area Council of Governments. Each of these organizations had an integral role in making tonight's presentation possible. Please give them a round of applause. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to tonight's speaker, Dr. John Gallucci. In March of 2020, when the world tilted slightly sideways, I found myself with an abundance of time and inquisitively decided to research the history of my quiet little village, Casterland. A quick Google search led me to a little known book called the Casterland Journal. What? Someone wrote a journal about Casterland? I'm confused. There's not a lot to do there. Little did I know that this Lewis and Clark expedition down the Black and Beaver Rivers in 1793 to 1795 would be so enthralling. At a time when Walmart did not grace the landscape of Loudville, nor a paved Interstate 81 or a bustling Route 12 connecting the wild northwestern New York frontier with the burgeoning cities of Utica and Syracuse, these 2 French explorers were courageously bushwhacking their way through what would later become Jefferson and Lewis counties. They had no Carhartt boots or Patagonia jackets to shield them from the harsh elements. They were aristocrats after all, and they certainly did not row their own boats. There was no tractor supply to pick up a new yoke for their oxen, nor countryside vet when their animals fell ill. Even though they were in the boondocks, there was no boondocks in which they could rest their weary bones and enjoy a hot meal. As the journal comes to a close, one man sits despondent in the halls of Versailles. The struggles and hardships engendered feelings of despair and failure. From his vantage point in history, Casterland did not survive. But wait, I wanted to say, come back, like we're here. You really did do something amazing. You paved the way for multiple communities with roads, houses, schools, and governments. And yes, over 20 years later, a crazy Village of Casterland trustee will search this thing called the internet to find that Dr. Gallucci took the time to translate your journal into French so that he could share it at a place called Laval Academy, where curious local citizens would show up to learn more about you on July 28th, 2022. It is with this that I introduce you to Dr. John Gallucci, Associate French Professor at Colgate University. His interest in turn-of-the-century French travel journals led him on his own journey to translate Desjardins and Farou's French diary into English in 2010, so that you and I could enjoy this true story. It is because of his efforts that we are here tonight to learn of the adventures, losses, setbacks, and triumphs that these two aristocratic explorers faced. Please join me in welcoming Dr. John Gallucci.
Thank you. I am really very delighted to see local people interested in local history, and I'm so glad you joined us tonight. And I also welcome the people who are joining us through Zoom. I want to start on a bit of a personal note. I'm truly honored to be here. For anyone who studies Casterland or the Casterland Journal, Lowville is sacred ground. I'm thinking of Dr. Franklin Huff, who first translated the journal and whose works of history I found so fascinating. The Adirondack historian Edith Pilcher called him a multifaceted genius, and that is absolutely true. He's a genius still awaiting a proper biographer. And I am also thinking of Edith Pilcher, who wrote the first accurate history of Casterland. Her book, Casterland, French Refugees in the Western Adirondacks, literally changed my life. I discovered it years ago in the library of Colgate University. I was browsing in the stacks and I saw this book, and the spine said, Casterland, French Refugees in the Western Adirondacks. And I thought, what were French people, refugees, doing in the Adirondacks? Why this particular geographical detail, the Western Adirondacks? And I read the book. I was just stunned by what I was reading. It was completely unknown to me. And I wrote to the author. It was really the first book of history I read with pleasure. And I wrote to Edith Pilcher, and she kindly responded. This was many years ago. I remember it was in 1989. And a few years later, I had some time. I was looking around for some research projects, and I was thinking of the Casterland Journal. The story stayed with me. And so I wrote to Edith again, and we corresponded. We met in person, and one thing led to another. And I decided to translate the journal anew. So I want to start on this personal note. It's a way of expressing my gratitude to this woman who passed away a number of years ago, but she was instrumental in encouraging me in this project, because I am not a professional historian. I'm a French professor, and I study old things from the 17th and earlier. And as Heidi said in her introduction, I like travel literature, and these early things, I'm thinking of the age of exploration and so forth. But so I'm very grateful to her for this encouragement. And so standing here is really just, it's something that would have meant a great deal to the people whose shoulders I'm standing on. Let me add too a note of thanks to a few people. And I want to mention a group of people that I have had the pleasure of hanging out with on Zoom for about a year, called the Friends of the Black River. It's a very congenial group of people. And I want to mention the name of Carla Fowler, who was a member of the Tug Hill Commission, who skillfully organized our little Zoom sessions. And I would especially like to thank Heidi Lehman, who invited me to join the Friends of the Black River, and who has done so much to make the story of Casterland more widely known. And I want to express my thanks to her for that. So let's get going. This on the right, you can see it's a copy of it's the same book, and Edith Pilcher has made a little inscription on it, encouraging me in the translation. So I hope you allow me to indulge myself in a bit of a personal memory. So just what is Casterland? What is the Casterland Journal? This is a very brief summary of the ingredients, so to speak. Casterland is an optimistic, carefully planned business venture created by the New York company. Now, the New York company was not a company located in New York. It was a company located in France. And this French concern was very interested in American land. And the other ingredients are a map that was inaccurate, struggles and slow progress, and two people called the American commissioners, whom we will meet shortly. What is the Casterland Journal? It's a business report. It's a fascinating, to my mind, it's a fascinating window into the 1790s in American history. And it's also a personal diary. So these are this is just a preliminary sense of some of the main things that make up the Casterland Journal. I don't know about you, but when I was learning history, I learned some dates in American history, and I've forgotten most of them. I remember 1776, I remember July 4th, the War of 1812, we can easily remember. I discovered the importance of this decade of American history, and I want to briefly provide some historical context that I think is very helpful for understanding what is happening in the Casterland Journal and why we have this New York company, why we have French refugees in the Western Adirondacks. So I'm not interested in the dates per se, but in the sense of the whole decade, just what the decade meant in the United States and in France. And so I did put up some dates there, but there's a contrast between the United States and France. In France, things are violent. There's the French Revolution. And the French Revolution was a complicated process that evolved over a number of years. But the year 1793, the year the journal begins, was an especially violent year in France. Louis XVI will be guillotined in January, and later in the year, I believe in October, his queen, Marie Antoinette, likewise will meet the same fate. It is also the year in which Robespierre comes to power and begins the so-called Reign of Terror, and it was indeed a reign of terror. Violence became even more extreme. Just a factoid that is perhaps interesting or amusing. In 1794, Robespierre himself, who was a mastermind of the execution of so many people, would himself face the guillotine, and on a certain date, July 28th, 1794, he met his own end. And after that, the revolution became, violence subsided. But so the basic thing is that in France in the 1790s, we have a lot of social upheaval. In the United States, it's different. We have growing stability. And a date that is very important for understanding the Casterland Journal is the date of the adoption of the US Constitution and the official creation of the United States of America as a government and as a governing body. And this meant, what did this mean? It meant peace after the war, the Revolutionary War with England, and it meant a consolidation, a growing sense of stability that was tempered by the fact that Great Britain still had not relinquished certain portions of American territory. And this is something that I was astounded to discover in my work, that England still held on to what was called the Western Posts, that is forts along the Ohio River Valley, and not just along the Ohio River Valley, but also in upstate New York, in Oswego, for example. So there would be what a prominent historian, Alan Taylor, has called a Cold War with England and America, continued after the revolution, after the Battle of Yorktown, after the Treaty of Paris in 1783, continued so that there was actually a threat of war with England in the early portion of the 1790s. And with Jay's Treaty in 1794, 1795, this question of the Western Posts is settled, and a greater sense of stability and peace is achieved. So the peaceful United States drew from the social upheavals of France, people who wanted to leave France. And the result was the formation of this land company called the New York Company, not because it was located in New York, but because it had its origin in Paris, and its goal was to purchase lands in upstate New York. Its official name would be La Compagnie de New York. So the Macomb purchase was an enormous area of upstate New York that was actually purchased by a fellow named Alexander Macomb with his associate William Constable. They sold a portion of this land to the New York Company. And with the Casterland Journal, there are so many people involved, each of whom would easily require a whole evening or more just to lay out their importance and value. But I do want to mention two especially significant individuals, James Loret de Chaumont and St. John de Crèvecoeur. James Loret de Chaumont, the name I believe is very familiar to people in the North Country. And St. John de Crèvecoeur, the name is a little bit less familiar, but he's very important. So you're looking at a map made by a fellow named Charles Broadhead, a surveyor who would work for the Casterland Company. And you're looking at a very significant map that we're going to see again. So just a few words about James Loret de Chaumont on the right, and then on the left, you have an image of Jacques Donatien Loret de Chaumont, his father. Jacques Donatien Loret de Chaumont was instrumental in helping finance the American Revolution. He was a good friend of the American Patriots, and he provided a home for Benjamin Franklin in Paris as Benjamin Franklin was negotiating with the royal government of France and on behalf of the American Patriots. His son, James Loret de Chaumont, is of critical importance to the history and development of the North Country. He was one of the main movers of the New York Company and one of the principal shareholders, I would rather say. I want to mention this fellow, his full name is Michel Guillaume Saint-Jean de Crèvecoeur. He is a very interesting fellow. He lived in America a good part of his life. He had an American wife, as did James Loret de Chaumont. And this St. John de Crèvecoeur wrote a book that is still in print today that became famous, made him famous, and contains a very famous essay from which I have quoted this passage. The book is Letters from an American Farmer, and it was published in the 1780s. And the essay is, What is an American? And it's a very interesting essay. I think it's a very topical question today. What is an American? And he uses a phrase that people say led to the phrase, the melting pot. He talks about how individuals of all nations are melted together. So these two individuals are just two among the many people involved in this enterprise of the New York Company. Something that is of great interest to coin collectors today is this Casterland jeton. It is a coin, but it is not a real coin because it wasn't circulated. It is they were made in gold and silver and bronze, and they are coins distributed to members of the New York Company, apparently as keepsakes or to record their presence at meetings. And these coins exist today, and you can purchase them on the internet. And they're a remarkably attractive piece of artwork. And what is interesting is the optimism that they portray of this New York Company. I want to just say a few words about the images that you see in front of you. On the left is the effigy of perhaps Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, or Dr. Huff in his history identifies it in a different way. But I'm more interested in the image on the right, in which you see a goddess. There, I would say it's probably Ceres, this goddess of agriculture. She's holding in her left hand a device for boring a hole in a maple tree. And behind her is a maple tree with a spigot in it. And from the spigot into a bucket emerges maple syrup. Underneath her feet, you'll see a beaver, an animal that of course signifies the fur trade, wealth, but also industry and hard work. This fellow, Chester Sullivan, is an expert on this coin. I've had the pleasure of communicating with him a number of times, and he calls this coin America's most beautiful French coin. And just to give you an idea of the size of it, it's a little bit bigger than a quarter, about the size of a $50. And this coin, I think, is especially significant because, as I said, optimism. And I mentioned James Leray de Chaumont and Crèvecoeur because they are both well acquainted with America. They're not novices. They're not simply dreaming something and then going off on some ill-founded project. The venture of the New York company was very carefully planned. So if you want to sell land, you need advertising. And the New York company created a prospectus. It's rather lengthy, and it contains highly exaggerated, extremely positive language about the land that the New York company is going to buy. I want to look at two passages from this prospectus. I highlighted a few words. Everything you need if you want to settle will be on this land. Everything. And the success cannot be doubtful. So what can you lose? You cannot lose if you invest, because it has everything and the success cannot be doubtful. Very optimistic. Let me just go back a bit. And that last sentence is especially important. We shall finish with several observations on the advantages which this region offers commerce. What does commerce mean? It means selling things in a market. But how do you get to market? You need rivers. And we want to notice this passage in the prospectus to understand further the Casterland business venture. The prospectus explicitly says New York State has the most advantageous location of any of the American states. It's located at the extremity of Lake Ontario, which is nearest inhabited regions. I'm not quite sure what that means, because I think what that means is it's nearest to Albany or something like that. But it is divided by several navigable rivers. At the time, it is of critical importance to understand just what a river meant in early America. It meant something like having the internet today. I don't know if that's a proper analogy, but I'm not quite sure it's an exaggeration. And the prospectus goes on to say, it quotes an American geographer, Jedediah Morse, saying that wherever you buy land or plant a settlement in New York State, you're going to find a navigable river within 20 miles. So you don't have to worry about having the internet. You will get it. So will the New York company actually have a river? Yes, they will. And the Constitution of the New York Company is the second document to which I alluded. It is a document that sets out the rules and regulations as to how the company will operate. And it says the land will have as its southern boundary the Black River. And so the Black River enters our story. And that is going to be a very crucial part of the history of Casterland. And so it begins on the north shore of the Black River, and which means that the Black River is going to be the southern boundary. I want to make that, I wanted to repeat that. Now, where does the name come from? The name of Casterland. The name comes from the French word for beaver, castor, and the Constitution of the New York Company states that the name officially of this land purchase will be Casterland. And why was Casterland chosen? Perhaps because the beaver is well associated with the North America through the fur trade, but also on this map, which is a very important map, which we will see again. We're going to look at a bunch of maps, maps that have a lot of blank spaces in them, interestingly. That area in the circle is designated as a marsh, and the quotation says this marshy tract is full of beavers and otters. So you're looking at an area just north of the Black River today, and the Tug Hill area you can see is pretty blank. That line, that curved red line, please notice that that's the coast of Lake Ontario, the shore of the coast of New York State and the shore of Lake Ontario. And you can see a few rivers sticking their nose into the Tug Hill region. I just want to mention that that will be an important detail in a moment for our discussion. I want to go over some geography, not to give a geography lesson, but just to create a shared sense of just of what will happen when the New York company encounters exactly what they did by. So this is just a generic map of some regions of New York State. You can see the Tug Hill area on that. I don't think people have any doubt where the Tug Hill is, but I want us to see it on the map. And I want people to see this too. This is a map of the Black River. It shows its course. And what is interesting for us right now is the shape of the Black River. The Black River, as you can see, has a few twists and turns. It starts in the Western Adirondacks, southwest, sharp turn in Lyons Falls, northwest, and then sharp turn at the Great Bend and into Watertown and out into the Lake Ontario. So we want to keep that in mind for later on. And I want to emphasize something about old maps, because just as rivers today don't mean what they meant for early American settlers, rivers meant transportation at low cost to markets, for commerce, for economic growth. And likewise, today with maps, everything is mapped, it seems. We have GPS, we have Google Earth. We found Lowville Academy. I found it, I used my cell phone. Everything seems to be mapped. This was hardly the case at the time we're speaking. And so this is going to be a crucial thing. And about the old maps that we're going to see, we want to pay attention to coastlines, rivers, and notice there are many blank spaces. So this is an example of a famous map. It's a map made by a fellow named Guillaume de Lille, and dated around 1718, and it's a huge map of North America, but this is a detail of New York State, and you can see the general some geographic features which are very prominent: Lake Ontario, Lake Erie. You can notice the Finger Lakes on either side of that red circle. You can see New York down in the lower right-hand corner. And what is of interest to, if you examine it more, you'll see the Hudson River, which goes off on a course, which along a certain portion is quite accurate, but then becomes completely imagined. You can see Lake Ontario in that ellipse, a line, and that I think is quite accurately showing, more or less accurately, Black River Bay and a portion of the Black River. So I just want us to notice that. Here we have a very important map that is going to be crucial for the Casterland venture. It's a map by Claude Sautier, who was a well-known map maker. His maps were apparently quite standard references in the 18th century. And we again are looking at northern New York State. We're looking at a greater detail, and we're seeing a blank space. We're able to see here, of course, Black River Bay. It doesn't have the same shape that we saw in the de Lille map, but there's no Black River. There's nothing here. There's some rivers. Again, The rivers into Tug Hill Plateau that emerge from Tug Hill Plateau into Lake Ontario are consistently shown, which shows that explorers would visit them. That is, they were on Lake Ontario. It was easy to navigate along the shore of Lake Ontario and to have to explore the interior through rivers that gave access to the interior. But anything further inland was really terra incognita. And just out of interest, just to give a sense of how what an old map really signified in the time we're talking of, I wanted to look at an even older map. And again, this pattern of coastlines and rivers is brought home to us, I think, in an interesting way. This is a very famous map from a fellow named Martin Waldseemüller, made in 1507, a short time after Columbus. It shows the world. And what is interesting is it's famous because it's the first time the name America appears on a map. And I'll show you where it is in a moment. But you notice in the middle, Africa, quite prominent, above Africa, Europe, and then to the right, you have a large landmass of Asia. North and South America are just these two skinny shapes on your left. And in fact, they're not even joined. They're separated by a small body of, small portion of the water. That is North America, and below it is South America. And the circle on the bottom shows the word America. It appears on this map again for the first time. Notice the coastline in this region that will become South America. It's just lines of rivers. The rivers dominate. The landmass is not proportional to the actual landmass. And this is North America, believe it or not. And again, we see a close-up gives us these rivers and this jagged coastline. In other words, North America or any landmass, the only part of it that's actually significant at this time because of the limits of travel are the rivers and the coastlines. And we saw that in even the maps of Claude Sautier, that the small rivers and creeks from the Tug Hill Plateau that go into Lake Ontario were visible, but the river that interests us is not there. Now, we're back to another map by Sautier, a map that's a few years later than the one we saw earlier, and it's showing grants of land. I'm not interested in pointing out these grants of land. The point is that this portion of New York State is beginning to be surveyed by actual surveyors and becoming part of the official cartographic record. And yet still there is no Black River. And this is the map from which Casterland got its name. There is the Black River Bay in a different shape. It's not called the Black River Bay. The French map makers gave it a name called Nia-Uré, is very common. This is a version that I haven't seen elsewhere. So where's the Black River? We're going to find the Black River finally. The Black River now appears on a map. This is a very important map. I guess all these maps are important, but this one is especially important because it's the actual map used by William Constable when he concluded the sale of the land, Casterland, to the New York Company. It's the actual one he had in his hands. It's in the collection of the New York Historical Society, and you can view it online. And that's how I got these images. On a copy of the Claude Sautier map, William Constable drew in the Black River. And that ellipse, that oval, shows the general direction of the river. I'm going to give you a greater detail in a moment because the line, you can see it clearly. You may not be able to see it clearly because it's quite faint today, but that is what he drew on the map. The red line I drew just underneath the Black River. The actual Black River, I don't think you can make it out. It's quite faint on this slide that I was able to create. The resolution was not perfect, but the red line shows the general trace of the Black River. So now remember that blue line we saw earlier that showed the Black River. It was kind of a Z, it was a zigzag. There were two zags in it. And here it's more of a flowing river, and it goes more or less east-west or west-east. The Black River's course is completely incorrect. The Casterland Tract, as we saw from the prospectus and the Constitution, from the Constitution, had the Black River's southern boundary. This is a rendition of what the Casterland Tract was expected to be. And with the Black River course in the shape that Constable drew it, this map actually should be more rectangular, but it serves the purpose. It's a connected piece of land. It has as a southern boundary a river, which means that every part of the southern portion of the tract of land has access to commerce. It's a good thing. This is what ended up being the actual Casterland Tract. Between this map and this map lies the story of the Casterland Journal, a story that is a story of hardship and struggle, of some triumph. It's a heartbreaking story in the end for the people involved, and and this map is a result of years of litigation and arguing until this inaccuracy was rectified in ways that were satisfactory to the parties concerned in the New York Company. Again, this is the map again that we saw earlier by Charles Broadhead, and it shows the final resolution of the New York Company's land purchase and the course of the Black River in blue. And just to show where Casterland is, we have here a map of New York State, modern day place names. And here we have the Great Fall just across from Lyons Falls. The Great Fall was the site of the first settlement. Above here we have Casterville on the Beaver River. It was to be the site of a city. Carthage or the Long Falls. The French always name things by geographical features. And here, the lower Great Falls, or today's Watertown. So here we have Casterland. And we're now starting to look at the Casterland Journal. And that's the title of the book that I had a hand in producing. The title was created by the press. I really like that title. It was not my doing. I'm not sure I could have come up with such a fine title, but the exploration and settlement of Northern New York State in these years. At the bottom, July 1st, 1793, the Casterland Journal begins. Are named as the company's American commissioners, Farou and Desjardins. These are our heroes for the Casterland Journal. Their heroism is in rectifying the error of the map that we saw earlier. The Casterland Journal contains many observations. Farou and Desjardins observe carefully everything. They observe people, they observe the land, the type of rock, the type of vegetation. It's a business report because they have to report to the New York Company on what they are doing. The Constitution of the New York Company charges them with many tasks. The primary task, the first order of business, is to survey the boundaries of Casterland. They carry out all their tasks, I think, in a scrupulous way. It's a record of their travels. It contains the practical and the aesthetic. The practical, making a settlement, making shingles, planting a garden, distributing rum to the workers, hiring workers, keeping workers, finding qualified workers. This comes up all the time. The aesthetic in the descriptions of nature, in small satisfactions that they have when they come across something like baking bread for the first time. There's a combination, so many different things in the journal, it's just hard to say simply what it is about. But something that I think does give us a sense of the general direction of the journal is the conflicts and tensions between the American commissioners and the New York company. If the New York company is about optimism and expectations, the Casterland Journal is about the realities of being on the ground. And there is a lack of understanding or sympathy between the New York company that will develop over the course of the journal, the course of the 4 years. This is the first page of it. And the cover, the book cover, it shows that cover is taken from the Claude Sautier map of 1777 and it's, from Constable's map, and it shows the course of the Black River just above that, the title. This is an important opportunity here speaking in Lowville because it's important to try and set the record straight about Casterland and the Casterland Journal. Casterland, the New York company, as a business venture, would not succeed. It would struggle for many years for reasons, some of which we'll look at in a moment. But it would, but that failure of Casterland, I believe, has cast a shadow over everything connected with Casterland. And I think the journal takes us in a different direction. It shows the kind of redemption of the people involved, that is Farou and Desjardins. The Casterland venture was very carefully planned. It was not pie in the sky. It was a carefully planned venture with very qualified people that was based on a very unfortunate mistake. So that is something I'd like to try and I hope to leave the audience with tonight, is the sense that there is this Casterland settlement that existed over 200 years ago on the shores of the Black River that has been absorbed into modern settlements, and but there and that the Casterland Journal tells a different story. I think it tells a story of a rather heroic people. That's perhaps a personal, that's definitely a personal opinion. So I want to give a summary of the Casterland Journal. It contains so many moving parts. I'm not sure I'm going to do justice to it tonight, but it covers about 4 years. 1797 is just it's just a month or two at the end, very brief entries. We have Arrival in America and Journey to the Black River. In 1794, the first settlement begins. The all-important survey of the boundaries begins, and Farou and Desjardins discover the true course of the Black River. Of course, the Black River was always there, and in fact, as one learns from the journal, Native Americans were present all along the Black River. It was not unknown, but it was unknown in an official way to map makers. So when I say they discovered the Black River, it's like when you say, I discovered a shortcut to the mall, or I discovered a new recipe or something. They discovered something for themselves about the Black River. And this is going to lead to a lot of tension and arguments with the people with the sellers of the land. 1795, there's further progress. A mill is begun, and then disaster strikes. It's heartbreaking to read of how Pierre Farou, a very talented person who was actually one of the leaders of the Casterland Company, will drown in the Black River. I was just talking with somebody about, what happened during the Casterland Journal. Two great problems arose. The fact that the Black River was not accurately mapped, and the fact that Pierre Farou drowned in the Black River. This changed things for Desjardins. He continues, but because The New York company is not satisfied with some of his decisions. A new commissioner takes over. The basic rhythm of the Casterland Journal is rest during winter. Desjardins lives in Albany with his family. Farouk will go into New York City, where he tries to get clients for his career. I forgot to mention both are architects, and Farouk also was an engineer. These two people were highly educated, very qualified people to send on this type of mission. I'm going to go over a few timelines for each of the years, just to give a general sense of what happens. There's so much that happens in each of the years, and I'm just skimming the surface. So I mentioned how they arrive in New York after a journey of about 2 months on the Atlantic Ocean. Usually, it took twice the time it usually takes. Farouk and Desjardins immediately go see James Constable and learn, to their great disappointment, that the surveys have not been completed. The promised surveys have not been completed. They are very unhappy with this news. They're not entirely happy with the reception that they got from him. And they decide to make use of their time and go and visit the lands and inspect them and make a report on them. So they journey by water. Overland is just too difficult. Simeon DeWitt, the Surveyor General of New York, says go by water. So they go through Hudson River, excuse me, Schenectady, Mohawk River, Fish Creek, Oneida Lake, Oswego River, Lake Ontario, Black River Bay. And they eventually get to their lands. And I love this sentence in the Casterland Journal, where they finally, after so many months and weeks of travel and sleeping basically in the open air, we had supper and slept in our lands at long last. A great sense of satisfaction, of accomplishment. I haven't mentioned Fort Ontario. Fort Ontario at this time was held by the British. This was a shock to me to discover this. And the commander, British, was not going to let them go by, because at this time, France and Great Britain are at war. And Farouk, you see his leadership qualities, argues with him, and the commander finally agrees to let them go by. There's more to it than that, but this is just an example of how each year that leads to so many encounters with so many individuals who are mentioned in passing, but who are themselves demand much more attention. This is an interesting year. It's a year where the first settlement is begun. And in a few moments, I'll show you a page of the journal where you can see a drawing of the first settlement. Pierre Farouk, architect and engineer, has met John Thurman, a landowner who lived near Lake George. And Farouk becomes involved with the building of the Champlain Canal, connecting the Hudson River with Lake Champlain, the so-called North Canal. And this is an example. Farouk will also become involved in 1795. We'll see that in a minute. We see Farouk beginning an architectural career. He is talented, his talents are recognized, and he's beginning to gather, gain clients and a reputation as someone who deserves to be used for building and for engineering projects. The name Baron Steuben may be familiar. He was Washington's drill master, a major figure in the Revolutionary War. He was given land by Congress in upstate New York, north of Utica, in Remsen, near Remsen, New York. He becomes a good friend of Farouk and Desjardins and gives them the hospitality of his home. At the moment in the journal where they stop at his home, he's not there. Where is he? He has been asked by the governor of New York, George Clinton, to inspect the borders because war with Great Britain may be imminent. So there's this constant context that surrounds our heroes, Farouk and Desjardins, that is potentially very turbulent, but which will gradually subside. So Baron Steuben becomes a friend of theirs. An overland road from Baron Steuben's land north to Casterland begins in 1794. It's a major piece of work. Portions of this road exist today. You can see it. It's called the French Road. And especially the survey of Casterland begins. Interestingly, the explorations of Ferrou lead him to a river that he discovers, that is, he sees himself for the first time on July 4th, 1794, and he decides to call it the Independence River, a name which exists today. The major event, discovery of the true course of the Black River. And in July, a furious letter is written up and sent to a fellow whom we will see again, Nicholas Olive, a shareholder of the New York Company and a merchant living in New York City. And you can see the determination of Ferrou and Desjardins in this letter. It's a lengthy letter, and they're demanding complete satisfaction, and they will remain determined to obtain complete satisfaction. And eventually they will get their way, or as within the limits of the actual course of the Black River. 1795 is going to be a sad year. I get a little emotional at this time. The Ferrou again is involved in a major engineering and architectural project with Robert Livingston, the Chancellor of New York State, at a place called Speranza. I don't think people would know where that is. I didn't know where it was, but it's modern day Athens on the Hudson River, south of Albany. He returns to Casterland, and a mill is begun, progress at Otter Creek. Actually, that's not quite accurate. It was started at Otter Creek, but they had to move it because the location was not within their land limits, and they moved it to much further away to the Long Falls. But there's a moment when the workers have worked well. The joists have been made, they fit, things seem to be going well. Unfortunately, there's a discussion and disagreement with this fellow named Louis Tassard. Louis Tassard was someone sent by Nicholas Olive to help Ferrou and Desjardins, but also to keep an eye on lands, because Nicholas Olive wanted to make a choice of lands that were being surveyed. And there was a disagreement because Desjardins felt the whole tract of land needed to be surveyed first before anyone chose their lots. And Nicholas Olive was not happy with that. So there's a discussion and disagreement with this employee of Nicholas Olive, Louis Tassard, who otherwise was a very helpful person. And this is going to have some consequences. This is a very sad moment, and was one of the passages that really was, when I read it and then when I translated it, was really quite emotional. So there's a catastrophic loss in September 1795. There's been a lot of rain, constant rain almost every day. These are just some examples of how the rain is noted in the journal, how it impedes progress. Usually when it rains, the workers stay inside under some shelter and they make shingles. And so constant rain, the Black River rose about 18 feet. That must have been pretty impressive. At the mill site on the Long Falls in Carthage, Geoffrey Desjardins writes the following: "At 3, I caught sight of some people on the other side of the river. I recognized them as being from Ferrou's company, and I was afraid that there had been some accident." So Ferrou, along with Charles Broadhead, the surveyor, some Native Americans, Louis Tassard and others, had set out to travel to Kingston because Ferrou was interested in opening up possible markets, or wanted to make business connections in Canada, and insisted on crossing a narrow passage of the Black River that, because it was narrow, was especially rapid. The Native Americans refused to go on to cross on the raft. Louis Tassart also refused, and Farou insisted. When you read the journal, Farou is always out in front. He's eager to move fast. He's not a rash person, but he wants things to happen. And unfortunately, when the raft crossed this rapid, they lost control and he drowned in the river. And this was a catastrophic loss for the New York Company. And this is a passage in which Geoffrey Desjardins is describing how they want to find Farou's body. His body would be found a year later at the mouth of the Black River, and James Louis de Chaumont would have it buried and create a marker for it. I don't think he had I think it was buried, and then years later, I believe James Louis de Chaumont created a marker for it. But be that as it may, the Geoffrey Desjardins writes how they were going to look for the body, and when they find it, they will bury it at the mouth of the Independence River, where he had hoped to build his home. And he says, we will raise to him an insufficient monument, meaning he recognizes how useless any monument will be to him because he did so much for Casterland. He was held in great respect. And this moment is a very sad moment for everybody involved. It devastates Desjardins. 1796 now for Desjardins will not be a very happy year. At the beginning of the year, the New York Company demands to be reimbursed some funds that it had advanced. And Desjardins is forced to sell some land and try to scrape together some funds. He complains about this bitterly in the journal. He meets with William Constable. William Constable has been in London for the past few years. James Constable, when he received the complaints about the Black River, said, you have to wait till my brother William comes here. Communication across the ocean was very slow. But anyway, finally, William Constable is in New York. Desjardins visits him, and he says that he was very polite, but very unyielding. He says he was as unyielding as he was polite. So I take it that he was very polite and therefore very unyielding in trying to resolve the border, the question of the boundaries. Improvements continue. Garden is enlarged. A smokehouse is added. Some small improvements in larger areas are fenced in. There's a theft of money from Desjardins' study, and the thief is eventually caught, and Desjardins must go to a trial. He loses time in attending this trial. He is mortified because when he and the lawyers sit down to have dinner, the thief is also seated at the same table as they are. And he's not happy about that. But the main thing is this conflict between Louis Tassart and Nicholas Olive, that is conflict over who gets what land, leads to another disagreement over the choice of lands for Monsieur de Chaumont, for James Louis de Chaumont. And especially this arrival of a fellow called Rodolphe Tillier, who will replace Desjardins as the American commissioner. The New York Company has decided that Desjardins is to be, in effect, relieved of his duties. He is still a shareholder, he can still have land, but Rodolphe Tillier will now run the New York Company. And what's happening in terms of settlement of Casterland? A few families arrived this year, and they're very unhappy with what they find. They find that there are no comforts. They don't have the comforts of Paris or of Normandy, that is the farms that they would encounter in Normandy. And this is an example, I think, of how realistic, in fact, Farou and Desjardins were. That is, they knew the realities on the ground, but communicating that to the New York Company simply was it didn't happen. The New York company was not willing to recognize or did not believe that things were just going so slowly with so much difficulty. And so Casterland developed this reputation that it would, you have to do too much work if you want to live there. If you want to live in America, if you're a French person, you want to live in America, you want to find a different area to live in. Desjardins, when he talks about Tilly in the journal, points out consistently the type of leadership that Rodolphe Tillier performs. Tillier spends a lot of money. He has cattle sacrificed because he wants to have a nice dinner. And it's clear that Rodolphe Tillier is not handling the New York company's business with the same care as Desjardins. Desjardins continues with Casterland for a while, but eventually returns to France. Tillier himself, after a few years, is fired by Wright de Chaumont, and Wright de Chaumont continues trying to make the New York company business venture a success. He enlists the help of his friend Gouverneur Morris, who had been American ambassador in France during the Revolution, and together they work to settle, to create settlements within the lands of the New York company. This portion of Casterland is something that you can read about in Edith Pocher's book on Casterland, or Franklin Huff's History of Jefferson County. It involves a degree of detail about settlements that the Casterland Journal does not go into. Eventually, the New York company is dissolved, I believe around 1814. How are we doing time-wise?
You're at 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock. Can we go on for a few more minutes? I just want to look at a few passages directly from the journal, and this is the passage. I'm going to go quickly for the first few, but there's one or two that I want to linger over. This is the passage where Desjardins writes that we went to see James Constable. He was not friendly. He was unhappy with us, and we discovered the surveys were not ready. That quotation below, "For God's sake, attend to the surveys," is a quotation from a letter by William Constable. And one of the great pleasures I had in working on this translation and the annotation was doing the research and discovering the actual letters written by William Constable and others. And he writes that in July 1793. At that time, Frew and Desjardins are in mid-Atlantic, but he's writing to a fellow named Samuel Ward, saying, make sure you get those surveys done. So there was effort behind scenes to get the surveys done. And I just like that sentence. I think it shows different people involved with different priorities, and how just there was just the lack of communication prevented the accomplishment of these all-important surveys. Quickly in this passage, at this moment, Desjardins is in the Black River Bay. He is examining a site that will become, he believes, a city. And basically, we saw all the advantages of this location. He talks about finding clay and stone. And I would like to ask, is it so unrealistic for a qualified architect to look at a site and say, this can become a city? Is that really so unrealistic? I really want to stress, I think, a kind of setting the record straight. Qualified people who encountered obstacle after obstacle until the obstacles became too overwhelming. Here, on the return trip in 1793, Frew, Desjardins, and others are involved with they're returning to, they're going to New York City. They're in a ship sailing from Albany, and they meet William Inman, who was a purchaser of land next to Casterland. And he says, William Inman says to them, you know, the Black River doesn't run in that direction. Your map is not correct. So there's a premonition of what awaits them later on. Just a few examples of the Casterland Journal itself. On the right, you can see a page from the Casterland Journal. The handwriting is incredibly clear. And below, a drawing of the actual first log cabin that they built. On the left, there are the page. I didn't give the page, an image of the page, but they give, they record their creation of a oven for baking bread. And so there's these combinations of little humdrum things that are just interesting to read. This is a good example of the art of Pierre Ferrou. This is a watercolor sketch that he made. It shows again, there we go. There's the original settlement of the Casterland Company. There's a road that goes to Steuben, and they had a ferry, they had a raft that they used to carry cattle across and supplies. This is looking north is to our right. Lions Falls would be here today. And you have the Black River and the Moose River. It's just, I think, a beautiful drawing, and is one of the examples of the talent of this Pierre Ferrou. Here you have a page of the Casterland Journal that shows in the margin drawings of plants that drew the attention of Geoffrey Desjardins. I'm sorry, probably Simon Desjardins, or perhaps Pierre Ferrou wrote this, who the authors of each passage are not always clear, but and so I conjecture it might be Pierre Ferrou in this case. This is a description of the high fall that we just saw in that drawing by Ferrou. It's a very beautiful description. Because of time, I think I'm going to just skip over it. And I want to linger over this passage, if I may, just for a moment. And just that sentence that is in bold. We're now in 1796. We are at a time before the arrival of Rodolphe Tillier and before Desjardins relieved of any official duties. He is admiring the Beaver River and a site that he thinks will become that he hopes will become a city called Casterville. And he admires nature. And this is a very interesting specimen from the Casterland Journal. He says the waterfall here is one which the art of Le Nôtre could never equal. Le Nôtre, André Le Nôtre, was the landscape artist for Versailles in France, and he designed a very geometric shaped garden. And Desjardins is saying, however great that landscape at Versailles is, what you have here is even better. And this is an example of the geometric pattern that Le Nôtre had to create. And I mention this because I think Desjardins has really, I'm sorry I skipped that, I can go back to it. I love this sentence. Desjardins sees and the future of this region. And what I like is that he truly loves the land. I think he would have been very happy here, somewhat happy. I think he would have been made perhaps successful in an individual way, perhaps not as in terms of the whole settlement of Casterland, but he likes the land. He sees that in a short time, it will become more populated. Interestingly, this is Geoffrey Desjardins writing this. I wanted to put this in because at this time, Geoffrey Desjardins is in Carthage, Long Falls, and an older Indian with a younger Indian come by. They're hunting. They leave a small moose on the shore, tie it up, and they go off and continue a hunt. And this older Indian says to Geoffrey Desjardins that the Indian name of the Black River is, as you see. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I find it just very ironic, just when this closeness is created between the people who actually live on the Black River and our French friends in Casterland. They will be forced to leave, or they will be treated as we've seen by the New York company. So we're coming to a conclusion, some legacies. What are the legacies? First, setting the record straight beyond the stereotype of romantic expectations and simply aristocrats. Aristocrats were indeed involved, but I think they were very accomplished people. The Casterland Journal is a work of American literature, and I think it deserves to be considered as American literature. I want to mention two engineers. Benjamin Wright was a surveyor hired by Farou and Desjardins to work on Casterland back in 1793. He would become the chief engineer of the Erie Canal in a few decades. And this Marc Isambard Brunel, I have not mentioned his name. Marc Brunel accompanied Farou and Desjardins from France to America and went with them on that first journey to the Black River. Marc Brunel would eventually go to England, and he would become one of the world's most important engineers. And to mention that Farou would have been, I believe, part of this company. The people involved were highly qualified, and I just regret. I'm heartbroken that Farou was not able to enjoy the same success in a subsequent career. This is an example of the art of Pierre Farou. This is an original drawing, a copy of an image of the original drawing. It's held in the United County Historical Society, of a plan for the landscaping of the estate of Baron Stuyben. The plan has never been executed. It would be a great tribute, I think, to both Baron Stuyben and to the art of Farou to see it actually realized, perhaps one day. And perhaps a final legacy, perhaps through the Casterland Journal, we've been able to, in a sense, rediscover the Black River of New York State. And I thank you for your attention. If there are any questions. Heidi?
Can you share briefly how the Casterland Journal came back to America? I think that would be interesting for them.
Yes. Excuse me, that's a great question. How do we know about the Casterland Journal? It was discovered by pure chance in Paris by a Bostonian named William Appleton. He found it in a bookstall in Paris. And if you saw the original, it's about the size of the Manhattan telephone directory, which no longer exists. And it's a very thick volume. It's about 9 by 11. And it's held by the Massachusetts Historical Society. He discovered it by pure chance, and so brought it to American, donated it to the Historical Society. He saw the historical value of it, and it's remarkable that it survived. One of the many interesting things involved with the actual journal is that there are some annotations by people. It's not clear who wrote it. It may have been Loré de Chaumont, may have been Tillier, expressing extreme disagreement with Desjardins. So thank you for that question. It's an interesting find. Yes.
I find it odd how in the just 40 years prior to this, in what would have been called the French war conflict, at Orlov's presentation and Vinochet, I think he was the governor or the leader of that, sent a force of Indians and French Marines, Canadian Marines down to attack Fort Bull. And I remember they came down the very river, the Black River, and they knew the trails, they knew everything seemingly about that, not only to get down, but to get back. But yet that knowledge seemed to escape in terms of 40 years later when these mappings took place. It just...
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that, because that's exceedingly important. The Casterland Journal, there's a passage in it where I believe Farou learns from an Indian that there had been war parties going down the Black River. So of course the Black River was known, but map makers did not want to share secrets, especially military information. And so blank areas existed partly because people did not know what was there, but sometimes they would know, but they would not want to share that information. And so clearly during the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, the water routes were probably very well known to all parties involved. And so thank you for that comment.
They didn't want to share.
Yeah, they did not, yes.
You mentioned that there are several points in which Native people are discussed in the journal.
Yes.
Do they offer any ethnic affiliations for these people, or do they just say the Indians, like, do they talk
Yes,
about
yes.
they belong to?
Yes, the French word they use is India, but they point out that some of the tribes are Mississauga Indians.
Okay.
And they also mention specifically the United Indians. I want to come back to that point. The name of the Black River that I gave, I don't know Indian Native American languages. I looked up some sources. It seemed to have some kind of echo with the Oneida language, but I'm not sure.
I guess it's what was showing the last piece means big, something big. The Goa.
Yes,
something
it
big.
means Great River. Yes, thank you for that information. But I want to come back to, in 1793 especially, they encounter and on their journey now and then some Native American families who come across as exceedingly impoverished.
We can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where should I start from? So in 1793, describing some of the encounters with Native Americans, we have Frew and Desjardins, as they travel along the Mohawk River and through New York State, they encounter some Native American families and who are typically very impoverished. And these are some brief descriptions. Again, there are so many things to discuss in the journal. And one of the times they describe them, they say that the father had created a painting, and they just mentioned that in passing. It would be so interesting to see that. But especially on the return trip, they actually visit the United Nation and meet the chief Skenando. I completely left that out. It's a very interesting passage. They spend some time there. They have dinner with him. At the same time, it's a moment when Simeon DeWitt is negotiating with another person in the United Nations for land. And they have a very interesting conversation. Skenando says that he would like to have some French people as neighbors. I think not because he wanted like French cuisine or anything like that. I think he wanted, I think he was thinking of maybe having, what's the phrase I want to use? Of using a French presence to push back against a British presence or an American presence. I think he felt they could be allies. Is there,
Yeah, no, that's great.
Okay.
I was just thinking, when you did your timeline, 93 or 94, somewhere around there is the signing of the Canada-Eglet Treaty. And so I was wondering about how these sort of Haudenosaunee folks they were encountering with that playing.
Right. I think it was 1794, the treaty of Canada. Yes.
Several times in the journal, it's repetitive that, looking for more workers, can't find any, but, is that, and then when there were workers, they, when cats obey, the mice will play, there was, a lot of laziness, like a lot of, nobody wanted to work, nobody wanted to, not unless somebody was standing right by them. Is that interpretation, or is that the way it really was?
I think that's a very good question. The question of workers was a constant problem, finding good workers, qualified workers. And there was a party of surveyors that they had a conflict with, and the surveyors quit. And the question of how to pay them was a big question for Desjardins and the New York company. And he says that the methods of the New York company resulted in extra cost, and people were not working for themselves. They were, I can't quite remember how he put it, but the workers would, some of them became very faithful workers, but others were just there for the money. And did not seem to would desert because other settlers would be offering more money. When the Erie Canal, I didn't mention the canal works that were being developed at the time when in Little Falls, New York, there was a development of the Western Inland Navigation Company. In other words, there were a lot of engineering or other settlement projects that would draw workers. And it was perhaps in the method of the payment that the Casterland people were required to use to contract with the workers that resulted in giving them money, but not getting back from them what they deserved. So I think it was a problem that I saw in letters from from other early letters from the 18th century about people complaining about workers. I think that might have just been, I think Faroux and Desjardins were quite driven. I think they were very determined to try and turn over the land and make it access as soon as possible. I think they were fair, but they were very, probably very demanding in what they expected. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, I mean, it's right now and the fact that, you know, let's searching for the livestock today, you know, over and over, it seems to be the common themes throughout.
Yeah. Oh, I think also they didn't have enough money to get the things they really needed all the time. I think if one were to actually observe, it would just be such a small group of people struggling with what they had. And I think that the complaints of Desjardins over lack of funds are constant. And when Laurent de Chaumont, I think he was more successful in how he planned settlements and drew people to his own settlements following the after the Casterland Journal, in the period after the Casterland Journal. Yes.
We have a question online. What Indian tribes were inhabiting the area concerned at that time?
The United Indian Nation, I would say, and they meet along Lake Ontario, the Mississauga, a group of Indians whom they identify as Mississauga Indians. Yes.
The settlement in Lions Falls, how long was that occupied for? And does it indicate how many people live there?
That's a good question. After about a year, they engage a family to spend the winter. Faroux and Desjardins themselves do not spend the winter there. And it was even at the maximum time of settlement, maybe 20 families, but not in that area. I would say just one or two families. They were, one of the things that was a handicap was the location, the distance, competition from settlements along what is now the Tug Hill, in the Tug Hill region. And in 1794, there was a type of sickness, dysentery or something that affected Faroux and Desjardins, the workers, that created a reputation that slowed the appeal of living in that area. And so there were a number of factors that limited. So there was never I think the maximum number of families within the Casterland Journal there were 2 families. Yes.
Just a comment online from Patrick Reynolds of the United County History Center. He
Yes.
says, thank you. And he says that the museum does own the drawing of the plan of Steuben's estate. So he said it's great to learn of its connection. Oops, I went up too hard. Okay, there we go.
Well, thank you. Tell them
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Anything else? Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gallucci. I just want to mention in closing that the purpose of this evening's event was planned tonight so you could learn about the history, eat at Croghan tomorrow evening with the food trucks, and then paddle down the Black River with the River Fest that is starting in Casterland and going to Carthage. And you paddle at your leisure and you'll pass all the things that Dr. Gallucci talked about this evening. So thank you again. We appreciate coming
My
up.
pleasure. Thank you.
Very good job. Nice job. Thank you. Yeah, it was very good. Very good. Yeah. we got
It was a great
all-
audience.
Yeah.
And it was- Thank you for all your help in organizing this.
That was fun.
It was fun. It was fun.
We like doing stuff like this. You can find me at it. Yeah. That is. That.